Miles McCarthy received a call from a hiker in Florida who stumbled upon lumps on a tree in the woods. It had been 2 years since his mom vanished without a trace. Something deep inside of him urged him to investigate. As he approached the site, he realized that the lumps on the tree were a clue that could unravel the mystery of his mother's disappearance. Miles knew he couldn't let this chance slip away. His heartbeat dribbled in his ears as he followed the hiker deeper into the forest. Wet leaves squelched under his frantic steps. After 2 years of searching, he was finally at the precipice of the truth. If only he knew what awaited him at the end of that dark trail. Before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. It had been a challenging month for Miles McCarthy, who, like many 20-year-olds, was trying to figure out his place in life. After a harrowing 2 years rife with nightmares and frequent visits to a therapist, he was finally at a place where he could start anew. That was until he got that call on that fateful night. Miles had always been a quiet boy, a single child in a loving home. His parents made sure he wanted for nothing. He had every toy and book he wished for and enjoyed many visits to theme parks most only dream of. But more than any material gift or trip, Miles had the undying love of his doting parents. He had no clue that the terrible end was looming above him. Miles was 18 when his world turned on its head. His mom, a celebrated botanist who also doubled as his best friend, had a heart attack. He and his dad drove her to the ER, hoping she'd make it. After a few hours, the doctor came out with his findings. Miles' mom had diabetes, and her high blood pressure spiked the heart attack. The doctor promised she'd be fine. He didn't know that her journey back to health would ultimately lead to her disappearance. Miles remembered how his life changed all at once. His mom, who had always been a ray of sunshine, was suddenly different. She would stay cooped up in her room for hours on end, only coming out for food, to use the bathroom, or to kiss him goodnight. But that was only the first half of Miles' nightmares. His dad tried everything he could to thaw her back to her old self. But it seemed the doctor's diagnosis had utterly changed who she was. In turn, Miles's dad became obsessive over her situation, leaving Miles to fend for himself despite being just a teenager. It wasn't long before he felt alone in a house full of people. Miles thought his family could work through whatever was going on. They'd always had their problems, but none of those issues had split them as much as this did. Then all of a sudden, his dad reported his mom missing. Miles could remember him calling that evening, explaining that no one had seen her in 3 days. But the terrible end wasn't here yet. What followed was a 2-year search that amounted to nothing. Each of those months was grueling for Miles, who couldn't understand why a person would harm a sick woman. The authorities claimed his mom was last seen riding her bike in the local forest, which she loved doing. They promised to give the case their all, but their promises would soon fall short. The county authorities could not make any significant steps in finding Miles's mom. Her trail had gone cold, somewhere in the labyrinthine forest. They sent out several search parties equipped with K-9 units and helicopters. They even accepted civilian volunteers to lend a hand, but their search would amount to nothing. The authorities deemed the case a cold one. No one could understand how a middle-aged woman could lose her way in a region of the forest she was familiar with. Nothing about the case made sense. The authorities urged Miles and his dad to continue their lives, promising they would open the case if something came up. For 2 years, nothing happened. Miles and his dad changed states, looking to start fresh. Although heartbreaking, they put their house on the market and moved on. Miles underwent several therapy sessions to cope with everything. Eventually, he was able to focus on his life again. But while in sophomore year, he received a call that would change his life forever. The caller, a 24-year-old hiker named Tim, had been frequenting the region of the forest where Miles's mom's trail went cold. After losing his own mom to the same forest 5 years earlier, he couldn't stomach the thought of another teenager going through what he did. Miles wouldn't believe what he had in store for him. The information Tim gave Miles sounded odd at first. While trekking through the forest, the hiker stumbled upon a tree that seemed normal at first. He was deep in the growth, deeper than he'd ever been before, and didn't think he'd find something like it in such a location. Looking at the tree, it was clear it held the key to finding Miles' mom. Tim studied the tree up close, gasping when it affirmed his theories. He took a few photos of it and rushed home, ready to break this case wide open. The first place he went to was to the local station to report the matter. But the officers didn't think much of his findings. After all, how would a tree species crack a case that had been on ice for 2 years? Seeing that he would need more immediate help here, Tim drove to the old McCarthy house. He knew they'd moved but needed to figure out where. One of their neighbors could help him contact them. He was able to talk to their immediate neighbor, a wonderful 80-year-old woman who told him the McCarthys had relocated north. Although she didn't know where exactly, she theorized that they were in New York or Pennsylvania. Tim was distraught. Tim had thought the McCarthys shifted towns or counties. When he heard they moved across multiple state lines, the hope he once had came shriveling down. He went back home to assess everything. If he was right, the tree would help put everything to rest. What followed next would demand a lot of time and resources. Was any of it worth it? Tim wanted to save Miles from what he'd gone through. He'd hoped to give him a better chance at life owing to the closure he'd find inside that forest. What he'd found in the forest was mind-blowing. The tree in question wasn't indigenous to the region, which meant someone had planted it there. Tim hoped this person was Miles' mom, or at least someone who could lead them to her. Tim took to social media, searching for every Miles McCarthy he could. As he didn't know Miles personally, he found local teens in his town who knew him and cross-matched the photos for a possible match. It took a little while for him to track Miles on Facebook. After hours of thinking it through, he shot the 20-year-old a message. Tim paced about as he waited for Miles to open the message. He knew what he was doing was dangerous, opening old wounds like this. But he was already in too deep and would do anything to help Miles not undergo what he did. He watched with bated breath as Miles opened the message, but no reply came. Frustrated, Tim made an unexpected move he called. Miles answered, immediately accusing Tim of mocking him. He explained that people often sent cruel messages about his mom, but Tim assured him he was different. He had found something that might reignite the cold case. Miles' heart pounded. The pain, fear, and anxiety he thought he'd buried resurfaced. When Tim asked if he'd come to Florida to explore the forest, Miles didn't hesitate. With their gear ready, they trekked into the muddy forest, rain pouring down. Miles had never been this determined. He hadn't even told his dad the real reason for the trip, just that he was visiting old friends. That lie would soon catch up with her. As they navigated the hilly terrain, Miles questioned Tim's confidence in finding answers from a tree. Tim simply told him he'd understand soon. His calm demeanor gave Miles hope, though he had no idea what lay ahead. They descended into a valley, a vast green basin where the setting sun peaked behind storm clouds. Tim shared that the forest had once taken his own mom. He said he understood Miles more than anyone else. He revealed that it took 5 years for the authorities to find her body. Even more haunting, she had died only 6 months before the discovery. She must have survived alone in the wild for years before succumbing to the elements. The story hit Miles hard. He realized he wasn't alone in his pain, but also saw the brutal reality of what could happen. He wiped a tear and pressed on. All that mattered now was reaching the tree Tim had spoken about. They pushed deeper into the valley, using flashlights as night fell. Tim suggested they stop and make camp, but Miles refused. He was too close to stop now. Ignoring warnings about the dangers of nighttime trekking, Miles led the way until they reached a clearing. Tim placed a hand on his shoulder and pointed to the center. "We're here," he said. Miles stared at the tree. It was different, newer than the rest, clearly planted. One look, and he knew exactly what Tim had meant. It wasn't native to the area. "This tree isn't indigenous," Miles whispered. Tim confirmed it, explaining that someone had cleared the area and planted it recently. Miles' mind raced. His mother had been a botanist. It made sense this had to be her work. But before he could speak, a figure stepped out of the darkness. "Mom?" he stammered. The woman emerged slowly. Her clothes were worn but not filthy, her eyes alert and clear. Her hair was braided, her presence calm, almost surreal. "Miles," she said. He ran to her and embraced her tightly. It was really her. After all these years, he'd found her, but the moment raised more questions than answers. If she was alive, had she chosen to leave? Or had she truly been lost all this time? Miles knew he needed to get to the root of the matter, but after 2 years without his mom, he figured he could let the questions rest for a night. He felt alive now that he'd found her. All those months of torment could finally burn away. But the sense of peace would be short-lived. His world was about to shift again. "It's dangerous out here," his mom said, motioning Tim closer. She had seen their flashlights and assumed they were lost hikers. Few dared come this deep into the forest. Between hidden pits and wild animals, the risks were real, but now, she assured them, they were safe. She took Miles' hand and asked if they wanted to come to her place. They followed her through the dark, muddy trees, surrounded by the natural hum of forest life. Eventually, they reached a clearing lit faintly by a lantern. In the center stood a log cabin, modest but clearly maintained. A garden grew on one side and a rack of hides stood drying nearby. But there were more unusual signs. A bench sat beside the garden, and the fireplace had been covered with black plastic. It looked less like a survival shelter and more like a place someone had chosen to live in deliberately, away from prying eyes. "Shoes," she reminded gently as they stepped inside. The cabin's interior surprised Miles. The space was warm and inviting. A rug lined the floor, a couch and table made up the living area, and a full kitchen stood in the back. 2 doors likely led to bedrooms. His mom moved calmly through it all, as if she'd been here forever. "Nice place," Miles commented, trying to make sense of it all. "Thank you," she replied. "It belonged to a friend of mine." "It's everything a cabin should be," he said. "A home away from home." At that, her expression shifted. Then came the question he'd been holding back. "Why did you leave us?" His relief twisted into sorrow. "We thought you were dead." Tim, sensing the tension, quietly stepped outside. His mom stopped what she was doing, her expression dimming. "I had to," she said softly. "I would have died if I stayed." Miles' voice cracked. "And you couldn't take us? We spent months searching, mourning." She led him to sit down. "You're a grown man now. I'm so happy to see you, but you deserve the truth. Your dad and I weren't happy. We had a falling out long ago." She brushed her fingers over a scar on her arm. "It may have looked perfect, but it wasn't." He didn't want to hear it. "That's not true. I remember how happy we were." She shook her head. "You remember what we let you remember, a happy childhood." "Happy?" he snapped. "Tell that to my therapist. 18 months of trying to forget the pain." Her voice turned sharp. "Don't use that tone with me!" He recoiled. "Life isn't always kind," she continued. "It's full of pain, disappointment. I didn't want you growing up resenting your father or me." She reached for his hand. "Some days I wanted to tell you everything. I thought about taking you with me, but I couldn't. You had your whole life ahead of you." She exhaled, her eyes tired but open. "You're old enough now. If you want the full story, I'll tell you."